sweet, sweet love. Now ain't that just a little bit better? Oh, 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 oh.
Good morning. Welcome to the May 31st, 2017 special meeting of Glendale City Council. May we have a roll call, please?
Council members Agajanian,
Present.
Devine,
Here.
Najarian,
Here.
Sinanian, here, Mayor Garpetian.
Here. What's next, please?
The agenda for the May 31st, 2017 special public meeting of the City Council was posted on Friday, May 26, 2017 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Before you is Director of Finance regarding budget study session number 4, recap new adjusted fees, update on pensions rate stabilization program, section 115 trust. This will be a presentation and discussion. I should also note that there was a closed session item listed on this agenda, but it is being taken off calendar. It will not be discussed today.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ochap?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you, members of City Council. This is our 4th study session, really designed to mop up any open-ended issues, and you'll see, for the most part, that pertains to the proposed PERS trust, as well as some items related to fees that Council had questions about. At the same time, there are a couple of items that have come up since our last study session that we would like to program into this budget and seek your indulgence in doing so as we prepare for the budget hearing on June the 6th. As City Clerk indicates, everything for today is about discussion, and you can give us direction, but certainly you aren't voting necessarily on any item today. About those budget adjustments, a couple of items in particular. You probably have read, and our residents have been emailing quite a bit over the last year about, I believe it's called the shot beetle. And it is wreaking havoc on the trees all across Southern California, and wanting to ensure that Glendale stays ahead of that curve. The Community Services and Parks folks are asking for $85,000 that would actually be used in the coming year to treat preemptively many of, if not, I'll have to defer to Onik on the number of trees, but trees in our parkways and trees in our parks. From, again, I want to say it's the shot beetle. Is that right? No? Where's Onik? I can't see Onik. He's not here yet. He's on his way back down from Brand Park. But the idea being that this will be, I want to say more than 1,000 trees would be treated by our contractor, and thus prevent these trees from being eaten and infested by this plague that you're seeing reported both in newsprint as well as television media. Just something that we can do preemptively for a very low price, $85,000. With respect to administrative services, we are looking to enhance internal controls by way of moving an existing position, not a new head count, but an existing unfilled position from one department over to the Administrative Services Department, and reallocating it as an Accountant 1. That would be about $20,000 above what that is in the budget for today as a CDD position. So again, no new head count, still a staff line position, but moving from a staffer in CDD over to the finance folks in administrative services, and increasing the cost of that budgeted position by about $20,000. With respect to human resources, we have gotten from our broker the liability premiums for general liability. Unlike what we saw with medical insurance premiums, where the increase was well below what we had feared it could be, it was in the low mid single digits. The general liability is up $400,000. However, because council had been setting money aside to build up that fund balance in the liability fund, this really won't impact our bottom line. By way of the budget that we're presenting to you, it'll be the $400,000 increase in the premium would be drawn from the liability fund. So again, a change. You'll see that as we present it in a week's time, but 3 relatively small alterations from where we were. As I mentioned, we were looking at a $836 million budget. Still 836, but you'll see reflected the increase of 504,400 by way of the liability fund appropriation, and the 85,000 for community service and parks for the treatment of the trees, and $20,000 for the Accountant 1 position. Yes, ma'am.
Question, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
On the pesticides, I just want to make sure that those are pesticides that are non-toxic.
I would be able to commit to you that they aren't of the variety that we are moving away from by way of the treatment of herbicides. These I will have to defer to CSP regarding the actual compound that we are using, but it's the one that we are using throughout Southern California. And ONIC is here to treat the trees to keep them from being infested by the beetle.
Good afternoon, Mayor Garbetti and members of the council. We're going to be treating next year over 700 trees in our parks, and basically the chemical that they'll be using is environmentally safe. Basically, it's a preventative measure to prevent the beetles from attacking the trees themselves.
Thank you. Thank you.
So the chemical will be environmentally safe.
Great. Thank you. And the second question, this is on the next item, the administrative services, the position. The position is accountant 1
Yes.
position, and that's 20,000 more than where this person was before?
Yes, it's an unfilled position in Community Development Department. So because Mr. Lanzafame has graciously offered up that position, he doesn't need it at this point in time. He'd love to have it, but he doesn't necessarily need it. In administration, he would forward that over to his colleague, Mr. Elliott. And where we do need additional positions at this point in Bob's shop is with the accountants. So for a reallocation upwards of $20,000 from what it is today to what it would be under Bob.
All right, and that's an accountant 1 position.
Accountant 1.
And that's the lowest level, and it's administrative, or no?
Accountant.
It's just an accountant 1.
It's an accountant, yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I have a question.
Senator Jarian.
And before we get into the specific funds and the fees, and we haven't discussed it as it relates to the budget, but I would like to know what, if any, effect permitting marijuana retailers and growers would have in terms of revenue enhancement. There's a lot of numbers getting thrown out there. Is this going to save our budget? Is it going to be a small dent? Is it going to be cost us more in terms of enforcement? At some point, I'd like to see that, and because that's really one of the factors, aside from any moral or principled objection that may exist to the industry.
Yes, sir.
I mean, at some point, I'd like to see how that fits in and find out what assumptions we're placing on that, whether it's taxing, whether it's fees, whether it's licensing fees, permit fees, sales tax, whatever that is. At some point, and perhaps at the best time to have that. I know we didn't want to. That could subsume our whole discussion of the budget. I don't want to do that, but at some point, I'd like to see what.
So you're making a motion to bring that back?
Well, to bring it back, the question is at what point? Because we're talking about the budget, it may be more in context now as we look at our fund revenue projections. And
I would tell you that if we can't find any direction from the federal government, and at this point, I don't know that we have high confidence that we would get direction as to which way they're going to go on enforcement, just based on all the number of things that are happening at that level. And we were to move forward with a community discussion, a dialogue about what to do with Prop 64, that would likely happen over the course of this summer. The results of that dialogue would then come back to the council probably in the fall. And if we were to move ahead with any kind of permitting system by way of a regulatory apparatus, by way of council direction, that would, I would imagine, get rolled into the mid-year budget come February. Your question about revenue is a good one, because depending who you talk to, some folks will say that it is this panacea of funding. You have a city up in the high desert that is touting that it will balance their budget. I really couldn't speak so much to that. What I can speak to is here in the LA metropolitan area, some of the experiences that other cities that had previously allowed for medical marijuana and now are looking at this notion of recreational marijuana and regulation and taxation. They have found that if they overtax, if they overburden that tax, all they do is drive the activity back into the black market, which kind of defeats the whole purpose. If we are looking at possibly doing something as a municipality, it probably would be in the vein of generating a rather small amount of funding, quite honestly, to the tune, if I had to anticipate, anywhere from $1 to $2 million. Because the activity would, based on what we've seen on the survey that we have online, based on what we saw from that first community meeting, even if folks are willing to entertain the notion, they at the same time are not wanting to see this become something that the city depends upon. And so to that end, impact on budget would likely be that the money gets steered back both to the police department and possibly to other treatment avenues and human services, as opposed to just coming into the city's general fund to pay for any number of activities and services. It's one of those things that as a policy question, you are left having to wrestle with the notion of Glendale voters voted, I believe, 54% overall. I think only 2 precincts in the city voted against. Every other precinct in the city voted for, as low as low 50s in the north, as high as high 50s in the south. And residents have indicated in the surveys, the online survey is pretty much bearing that out. It's mirroring one and the same. Thus, the question, I think, for the council becomes, if that's where the community is going, do you preempt that community sentiment, understanding that the state law today allows you to carry, allows you to consume, and to some degree allows you to grow. And when you look at the apps that are online now, and you look at where different outlets are, Glendale is surrounded on 3 sides by LA where it is legal, and that adds a bit of a reality check. And so, to the extent of how it's ultimately considered and regulated in the city of Glendale. So, long story short, sir, I would tell you that don't count on revenue, because I think that revenue basically gets eaten up by the system itself. And to the extent that you don't want to drive activity into that black market. And behind door number 2 is still maintaining an outright prohibition as what you have today. So it's certainly, in Glendale's case, I doubt very seriously if it would be any kind of cash cow.
Just on that issue of the app, literally yesterday, someone showed me that app, and apparently there are 174 delivery services in Glendale. Currently. Which, 170 in Glendale,
Okay.
which brings to mind all these questions. Well, how do they operate? Are they legal? How do they do it? But it's there.
Yeah.
And apparently people use their phone to order.
Because it's lawful to carry up to the regulated amounts, and it's lawful to consume, as Mr. Snanian indicates, it's a bit of an eye-opener that you say, folks that live in town say, I will act as a courier. I will act as a delivery service. And if there is a person in Glendale that wishes to purchase, why not purchase it from somebody in my own town versus some sketchy or shady individual from across the river? And that reality is, I think, ultimately what will inform a good deal of the council debate. So,
And how do we hear a lot of stories about people are already selling in Glendale and they're delivering in Glendale. How do we enforce that? Do we have any, because we have an ordinance in place right now that prohibits all of that.
Correct.
Right?
Right.
Are we enforcing that? Or if we legalize the sales of marijuana, how are you going to enforce against the illegal ones? How can you there is no way that you can control that market the way it is right now. We don't have the resources to enforce. Even today, when we have an ordinance in place that prohibits sales and everything. So that's the question. Maybe when it comes back
Surely.
in the future, that's something that I would like to know.
Absolutely, because today you're right. You have an outright ban, and if we are aware of and notified, if police department or even code enforcement becomes aware of a distribution, a sale, we will absolutely crack down on that. But I think, as Mr. Snanian indicates, there are lots of folks in other elements of that industry that aren't necessarily selling; they're delivering. And at this point in time, I couldn't tell you that we have the means or the ability, as you point out, to go and do that enforcement.
So. We used to have stings on the people walking across, jaywalking the streets. I mean, if you look at the weed map, that's the map that
Right.
shows who's delivering, who's selling. You can have a sting operation and see who's selling and enforce the law. I mean, we can do that if we, I mean, it's just.
I'm getting the wrap it up signal from the city attorney. Because
That's why I wasn't looking at him. So.
but again, I think your point's well taken. If there is a sales element, we would enforce. If somebody is possessing, we're preempted by the state law in terms of what the state law allows.
Okay, I mean, I'm not going to too much, but how do we enforce alcohol? I mean, you don't get folks distilling liquor in their backyards. I'm sure they did 100 years ago, but somehow the market, law enforcement, post-prohibition was able to regulate this field, and taxation issues, everything plays into alcohol the same way I assume it should play into marijuana, because you tax alcohol too much, people will start distilling in their backyard. So anyway, I'm just saying it's not like it hasn't been done.
Sure. The apparatus is there if you choose to regulate. And I think that and I'll stop there as Mike is giving me the disapproving grimace. If you choose to regulate, then I think you have more latitude. Ironically enough, that may be counterintuitive in its face. Okay, so again, $836 million, a $215 million general fund is what's being proposed. Open-ended issues from our study sessions. You have seen these ad nauseum, and so I'll try not to spend too much time on them, except as directed by council. And to the extent that we have different cuts at the issue that I think reflect some of what council had been describing, at least on the periphery. So. Long story short, when we look at the kind of background, how we got to where we are and what the profile is of our obligations to PERS in terms of people that are today receiving pension benefits, 588, in safety and 1634 in miscellaneous. The years of service, I think that's a bit of when you look at years of service, 14 and 12, and people say, I can't believe that. Only 14 years is the average years of service in public safety. Well, yes, because people come to the profession, people leave the profession, people are injured on duty, there's a million stories in the naked city, and so not everyone does 30 years of service and receives that maximum benefit under PERS, both safety and retirees. Average pensions, you do see the amounts are nothing to sneeze at. $74,000, $35,000 for miscellaneous retirees, respectively. But again, I think on the average, when you look at the universe of obligations, the numbers that get touted, the ones that are the headline catching pension amounts, are the exception to the rule. If you think about it like our organization, how many city managers does this organization have? One. What percentage of your organization is executive management versus line and technical professional personnel? That's why we show you those numbers, those benchmarks. We are, I believe, 17% management. That would tend to indicate management salaries are going to be higher, thus only 17% of that population is going to be reflected in a higher pension amount because there are relatively fewer of those bodies in the overall system. When you look at what the market value of the assets that we have, 513 for safety and 768. Add them together, we get to that $1.2, $1.3 billion in assets. And then you see the unfunded actuarial liability, the UAL. That is the tail of the tape. That's how much money is outstanding that City of Glendale owes, ostensibly for, we call it past sins if you want to, the enhancement of those benefits that accrued to employees overnight by way of the change in state law and the granting of the 3 at 50 benefit and the 2.5 at 55 for safety and miscellaneous, respectively. So you can see what the challenges that we are grappling with. At the top, 2018, 2019, the fiscal year, you see our general fund gross cost, that is gross of the cost sharing that we do with our employees. That makes up 17% of the city's general fund budget. As you know, as a management group, our strong advice is to strive to keep that number, the percentage of general fund going to your PERS pension cost, at no more than 20%. You see those cities in crisis today, and honestly, it's come up from this council before. How are some of these cities who are already at 25 and 27, 30%, what are they going to do in fiscal year 2030 when our rates are projected to be at almost 24%? Their rates are probably going to be closer to 40% of their general fund. How will they survive? I couldn't answer that question for them, but I can tell you as your city manager, our goal is to keep this number at no more than 20% and hopefully drive it back down to that 10, 11, 12 to 15% that we had enjoyed previously. I mentioned the change in state law. The SB 400 approval that came in, that effectively is the tale of the last two economic cycles. If you recall, in the 1990s, the dot-com economy was all the rage, and we were told that the old rules no longer apply, and what goes up doesn't have to come down. It turns out Sir Isaac Newton was right, however, and at the dot-com bust in 2000, 2001, you saw the PERS portfolio begin to take its hits, and then again, ultimately with the Great Recession and the loss of significant amount of the PERS portfolio, ultimately it gets reflected in our rates. The state of California had basically, after the approval of SB 400, gave the state public safety employees and then state non-public safety employees significant increases for their pension obligations. And overnight, even if somebody had worked for 28 years under the old system of 2 at 60 or 2.5 at 50, suddenly was eligible to have their entire career counted towards 3 at 50 and either 2 at 55 or 2.7 even at 55 for miscellaneous employees. Overnight. Even if they had not contributed to it. That's how strong the PERS returns and the PERS portfolio was. And I can tell you that this is not a function of partisan politics. The law and order Republicans did it right alongside the public safety union and general employee public union employees in the legislature and up and down the state of California. It was something everybody wanted to believe, and not the least of which I would tell you was public sector management. Everyone wanted to believe that it was going to be so forever, and it was indeed, like many things, too good to be true. Here you see the representation of those rates. On the left-hand side is public safety. On the right-hand side is miscellaneous. You see with the public safety rate, we've shown you before, in the 1980s, the public safety rates were significant, and the miscellaneous rates were very significant, 32%, 20% respectively. But at that time, you also notice just to the right of that the portfolio, the retirement portfolio, was 100% funded. As you move further down to where the yellow highlight is, you see the phenomena that I had just described. PERS was super funded. The rate was zero. You had a rate holiday. And that is something I can tell you that we would never do again. Certainly we would never recommend again, because 1 year does not necessarily, or a couple of years doesn't make the ultimate difference. But as a management practice, that was a considerable oversight throughout. And so what happens after the dot-com bust, you see almost immediate, and the passage of SB 400, you see where the benefits were enhanced. The percentage of funded drops from 117% down to 88%, down to 70, to 66, to 69. And ultimately, you see the hovering around 67% in 2017, 2018. By the same token, that's buoyed a little bit by the miscellaneous rates that you see in the percentage funding on the right-hand side. This is what we are faced with. I mentioned that UAL, that gap between what is the funded rate today and the 100% funding that is the unfunded actuarial liability. And PERS has changed its rules, basically just saying that we are going to take a very sober and responsible look and approach to funding pensions. And what that means is that member agencies have to make up that UAL. What you see is no longer the rolling amortization of the UAL as they had in the past because they realize that they can't ever catch up. Instead, what you see reflected here is the recapture over this time horizon of that UAL. So along the left-hand side, you see fiscal year 16-17 with safety rates along the top, miscellaneous rates along the bottom. We'll focus primarily on safety rates because that is the more expensive part and the part that is almost entirely contained within the general fund. You'll see it's at 41% today, and it will climb very quickly up to a high of 77% as we get out into fiscal year 32 and 33. And then as attrition takes hold and folks fall off that mortal coil, and the impact of PEPRA is more completely appreciated, you see that the rate begins to slide back down until finally by 2042-43, a precipitous drop where the UAL is completely paid off, PEPRA is fully in play, and things get back to what had been previously known as normal. That is, and it's important to point out, this chart is not from PERS. This chart is generated by our actuary. So many cities, including Glendale, have taken that very same sober approach of getting a neutral third party to tell us and demonstrate to us what reality is, as opposed to just adhering to whatever PERS's advice was. Yes, sir.
Good question. So today, this year is 41%, right?
For safety, yes.
Yeah, the safety, and 22% miscellaneous. And that amounts into what, $40-50 million?
Thereabouts 45, I want to say, citywide. 45 million?
And then 50.2 for the next year.
That's right.
Okay, so the best case scenario on this chart is the very last year, which is 47-48. Am I correct?
That would be, yes, sir.
And that equals to the same amount that we're paying today, and a little bit more. Am I correct?
Yes.
So this liability is not going to go away anytime soon. I mean, what we have today is going to continue to grow. When it drops down, it's going to be pretty much equal to what we're paying today.
As
Yes.
a rate. Yes.
As a rate.
Okay, so that's why I wanted to make sure that I'm reading this chart right.
That's right. And so I think when you think of it, what do you do if you were to draw a straight line across from 16-17 to 47-48, and you say those are roughly equivalent. The trick for us is how do you shave off what's above that? And that has been what we've wrestled with at your discretion or at your direction. You'll recall, I think it was 3 years ago now, I mean, we were looking under many different rocks, conventional and unconventional. We had explored the idea of taking out life insurance policies on all of our employees for the benefit of the city as beneficiary, such that when they expired, the money would flow back to the PERS Trust. Morbid though that was, it really wasn't quite practical in terms of a secure funding scheme, not to mention that there is an outlay of cash for premiums. But the point being that we looked at under a number of different rocks before we got to the point that we are today. So as I mentioned previously, CalPERS is no longer using the rolling amortization. They're saying that in the 30-year time horizon, they want to be 100% funded. That is important to keep in mind because, as you indicate, Mr. Mayor, that is the period of time that we're focusing to try to make sure that we keep that general fund obligation at or below 20% of appropriations. That is easier said than done. You'll see over the next 5 years a significant ramp up over what has already been a significant ramp up, getting us to this point now. The folks at PERS are, as I say, taking a very realistic approach, dropping their discount rate from what it used to be. At one point, it was in excess of 8%, because they felt that even if they were able to call it that, they could maybe whistle past the graveyard of these obligations. Now they've dropped it down to 7.5%, and then soon they will drop it down to 7%. Still relatively aggressive, but much more realistic than what it had been in the past. They're also looking, as you see on the slide, a little more realistic approach to contemplating what mortality rates truly are and what they will be in the going year as people continue to live longer. So what do we look at? The mayor had made a number of observations in our previous study sessions that trying to mitigate the cost alone has to be Plan B. We need other elements of a revenue generation strategy in order to meet these obligations, and I think as management we totally agree. And I think when you look at the 5-year financial forecast, those strategies, those efforts are indeed embedded in the revenue numbers that we have over the coming fiscal years, plural, and that comes a great deal in the form of economic development. So we have discussions about how do we grow more money, especially in an environment where redevelopment has been taken off the table. That was the primary economic development tool that cities across the state had if they had a redevelopment agency, and many of them did. And so through the good work and direction of City Council, the tech initiative, as an example, that sprang forth from Councilmember Sinanian and the other members of Council, going back to the last administration, has been moving forward. Workforce development, something that has been argued for and amplified by Councilmember Devine most especially. This discussion of hotels, because Council had agreed, and as did the public, to increase the hotel tax, the TOT, to 12%. Can we, after we do a study, which was done, augment the number of hotels to bring a lot of that TOT back to Glendale versus hemorrhaging it to LA, Burbank, and Pasadena? We are in the midst of that now with several hotel projects either in design development or even under construction. 2 of them are. So our goal there has been effectively has been brought forward by the Economic Development Council of Los Angeles, LAEDC, that every dollar that we can infuse into the local economy, it turns over 2.5 times. And so to the extent that we have a very vibrant, dynamic business corridor in the downtown and on the San Fernando corridor and in Montrose, that we can buoy our own ships as we look at what our obligations are. Yes, sir.
What you mean by we invest like $1, then generate $2.50 in income for city?
Ultimately, it makes its way through sales tax, through property tax, through economic activity to the city. So when people say, why do you spend time trying to bring companies to Glendale? Whether they're tech companies or when we work very hard to get Avery Dennison and the Whole Foods Western Regional Headquarters, they don't generate sales tax. No, they don't generate sales tax, but their payrolls turn over in town because the people that are working there are shopping here, are dining here, they're generating hotel room nights. And so the idea being the rule of thumb, for every dollar of that economic activity that we are somehow spurring and bringing forward, it's turning over in the city on its own, and that commerce generates revenue for the city, either through our restaurants or our hotels and what have you. But again, cost containment is something that we continue to focus on, and making sure that we are recovering the full cost pursuant to council direction for services that are being provided. So, what does that mean going forward? Well, the idea of cost containment and the ability to grow revenue, to augment our economic development activities is important to us. You know that pursuant to council direction, we fought with the state of California, who was trying to remove from the city of Glendale nearly $40 million, a little over $40 million, in the redevelopment loan that was owed from the agency back to the city. The state was intent on keeping that money. Council said no, filed a lawsuit. We filed the lawsuit. We won that lawsuit. And to the extent that we are being repaid at an accelerated pace, still the same amount of money, but the net amount of that a little over $40 million that is being paid sooner than anticipated is about $35 million. That $35 million doesn't necessarily have a strict purpose at this point in time. And so what the staff had come back to you with was this notion of using that amount of money, socking it away in what amounts to a rainy day reserve to pay for ongoing obligations. Now, those PERS obligations, whether we have a tremendous amount of economic activity and growth in sales tax or no growth in sales tax, we still have those PERS obligations. Whether we win the GFT lawsuit on appeal or we lose the GFT lawsuit on appeal, we still have those obligations. It is the death, taxes, and PERS as far as we can see when it comes to understanding how do we meet those pension obligations on a going forward basis. Thus, there are several options for the council to consider. The first one being status quo, pay as you go. That's what we have done to date. Council has not done pension obligation bonds, has not invested in any other types of efforts to somehow abate the PERS obligation, because quite frankly, a lot of those other opportunities, like a pension obligation bond, didn't make a whole lot of sense to us. We're still paying the premium, we're still paying the interest and debt service on such bonds, and given the dynamic nature of that PERS cost, doesn't make a lot of sense. We will, as been suggested by council members in the past, when it makes sense, prepay that year's PERS bill if it means that we can save some money, and I believe we'll be doing that in the coming year. And it's great that council is constantly looking for ways to shave off $900,000 there, $1 million there, as best we can. But again, for that $400 million UAL, it's going to take a great deal in something more structured and strategic. So we look at this notion of creating a restricted reserve, effectively taking the money that we have, about $24 million, and putting it aside, giving it to our city treasurer, Mr. Manukian, and having him keep it in the city's portfolio where he's earning 1.5%, and we don't say that tongue-in-cheek. We say that as a reflection of Rafi making some very good decisions, boosting and taking advantage of the market as the market has risen, boosting our yield from what was below 1% to, I believe, a 1.5 to 1.6% going forward, doing yeoman's job. The alternative three, option three, would be taking an amount of money, putting it into a longer-term type of investment vehicle that would allow us to generate well more than the 1.5%. Understanding that investments invite risk, and so we would be looking at a moderate portfolio risk that would generate hopefully 5%. Hopefully more, but we are confident in the 5% number in collaboration with PARS and Highmark. Or based on council's discussions, especially concerns as it pertains to the liquidity of putting money into a separate trust for PERS obligations over the long term, looking at what really can be different variations on that theme. Either requiring that the PERS trust be liquidated every 2 to 3 years with a type of sunset clause, so that the city council, affirmatively would have to state every 2 to 3 years that you want to keep that money in that longer term trust, achieving a higher rate of return. You would have to affirmatively make that vote. Otherwise, the trust would be liquidated and that money would ultimately be reimbursed to the general fund. You say, well, how is that possible if these funds are restricted in an irrevocable trust? As we have explained a number of times, irrevocable means that it can only be used, that money can only be used for PERS obligations. As Mrs. Sain has indicated just a second ago, our PERS cost annually this year is 45, next year will be 50. So to the extent that we have an amount of money in that PERS trust, we would basically pay a portion of the PERS bill, and the money that we would have used from the general fund to pay PERS effectively stays in the general fund, or this trust would actually allow us to reimburse the city for PERS costs. And so the point being, if we're concerned about liquidity, the council, a council, would have to affirmatively say, no, we don't want that, we don't want to cash out as yet. Let it stay in the trust. There's one variation there. Other variation would be taking a smaller amount, not putting in the $24 million that had been originally recommended, and starting a little bit slower and saying put in 10 and let's see how the market responds. The third option, option 4C, ultimately could be put in the $24 million, but put it into the conservative portfolio versus the moderate portfolio. A little bit 6 1/2 dozen of the other, but the point being that we would be looking to find a means by which the council would be most comfortable in addressing that long-term PERS cost. These are just a little more detail on the various options that I just explained. And so at the end of the day, what we would do is recommend that moderate portfolio, which, as you see, both from your briefings as well as the slide here, that we do have money in equities, which we cannot invest in today by way of the city's portfolio, and the balance being in fixed income assets and 3%, a little over 3% in cash. And so we would recommend staying with the moderate, although again, council could say, no, we're willing to do it, but do it at a conservative portfolio. When you look at this discussion, I mentioned PARS as the trust administrator and Highmark is their partner. How did we get to that level? Or how did we get to that recommendation, that relationship? PARS has the unique distinction of actually being the outfit that had sought the private opinion letter, Bob?
Private letter ruling.
Private letter ruling from the Internal Revenue Service, ensuring that the funds that were invested through them, they would go in as tax exempt. As you have seen with other kind of horror stories, folks that don't have that private letter ruling, ultimately at a later date you could be hit with that tax liability. That is not the case as what we have with this outfit PARS. Also, it's probably worth noting this is not the first time that we had worked with PARS. If you recall, when we downsized the organization in 2012, we utilized their services to create the retirement incentive to entice folks to voluntarily leave versus run through the layoff procedure, arcane though it is and outlined in our city charter. Thus, what we are recommending to you for next week is that we maintain the recommendation for a 115 trust. That in doing so, council would knowingly reduce its general fund reserve from the current floor of 30%, although maintain the target of 35%, but reduce the current floor of 30% down to 20%, which is very much in alignment with other surrounding cities and a good reflection of our conservativeness over these last years. And still be in excess of what is required by the charter, and allow us to effectively create the trust, the 115 trust, to the tune of $24 million. With that, happy to answer any questions. Certainly, Mr. Elliott is here. We have representatives from PARS here as well, and we would take whatever direction the council has at this time.
Before we discuss the PARS or the trust account, I have a couple of questions and a suggestion on the fees.
Oh, do you want to run through fees? I can run through the whole thing if you'd like, sir.
No, not the ones that you have in your presentation. The ones that, because my understanding of this session was that we have more questions about fees and everything else. That's when we can ask these questions.
Would you like me to run through the fee slides?
Yeah. There's a presentation on fees as well.
And we can come back to the PARS trust or the PERS trust?
You can run through the presentation for fees, but I don't think my questions are in this presentation.
Okay.
That's what let me find my...
PARS might be a more interesting discussion at this point.
Well, if we have time...
Just because it's fresh and... but I...
No, I mean... I'll be quick. Just bear with me real quick. On the CDD fees, item 29, that building permit fees, $8,582.
What page?
Which one was it again?
Page 37 of 160, item 29.
Page 37.
Page 37.
CDD?
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Mm-hmm.
Is this, can you explain what that fee is? It's a
Building fee.
building permit fee, but is the building permit fee, isn't it based on is this based on evaluation or is it based on the square footage of the building that's being built?
It's the valuation of the improvements.
So valuation, this is for additions, or this is for brand new buildings? Is it a flat fee, or if, let's say you're building a 3,000 square foot house versus 1,500 square foot addition,
Right.
is this a flat fee for all of them?
It would be the 8582, yes, if your valuation for your proposed improvements, total valuation $1 million and above for the first $1 million. So I'd have either Jan, you want to come up, or Jan, and talk about how that gets calculated.
I don't have that slide with me, but I have a feeling I know what you're talking about. Our building permit fees are based on a sliding scale. So as the valuation goes up, okay. Yeah, so on 29, the building permit fee for the first $1 million will be that. And then we will add on an additional
$5.91 per thousand.
Yeah, $5.91 for each $1,000 of valuation above that. So if you go to $1,001,000 valuation, it would be the 8582 plus the 591. So it keeps going up, but we set brackets because each of those brackets changes the incremental charge that you get for each of the $1,000 valuations in that gap.
So up to $1 million, if you have if your valuation is 200,000 or 980,000, you pay the same flat fee.
No, if you look at the numbers before that, so a building permit fee total valuation of $50,000, it would be $738.20.
So number 25 and number 27?
Mm-hmm. And then for every thousand above that, we would add another $10. So as we come to different gaps, if you notice, like 26 has a $10 for each thousand valuation, 28 has an $8.16, 30 has a $5.91. Wherever the gap changes, we indicate a fixed amount for the first valuation up to that point, and then that's the new rate that will be charged for the increase in valuation above that rate.
Okay. Thank you. For the design review fees, we talked about this last year. Right now, if you file an application, you pay a certain amount. It's like $5,300. But if you get a return for redesign, you have to pay another $5,330. And if you get return for redesign again, that becomes very, very expensive and impractical, to be honest with you. I think we need to charge one fee and one fee only. And return for redesigns, they don't. Maybe what was it that we charge for $500 or so, maybe that amount. But this is very excessive. When you return for redesign for a window to be here from one side to another, and you bring it back, it just doesn't make any sense to pay another $5,000.
I think that the flip side to that is if it's returned for redesign and it ultimately is an entirely new design because it's rejected outright and DRB says no, we won't approve this and make significant modifications, then the degree of review by the staff is such that we're still engendering that same amount of cost because it is, if it were to ultimately be in many ways a new project because the previous design had been eliminated. Now, the other element too is that if you reduce that amount for the redesign, then arguably you decrease the disincentive for an applicant to adhere to advice of either the staff or even to the DRB, because I may as well just keep coming back for design review because it only costs me a smaller amount of money. Certainly the council has the ability to set those fees, but that would be the flip side to that argument.
Well, I don't know anybody who just want to keep coming back because the fees are less. I think people who come to design review, they want to get their project approved, a good project for the city and for themselves, and move forward instead of coming back 3-4 times because it's almost next to nothing. I don't see that happening, to be honest with you. But I think these fees are excessive on the second round. So I don't know if there is a. How do my colleagues feel about this issue?
Mr. Mayor, I was just going to add, we can go back and look at different ways. Right now, you're required to, if it's go back for redesign, you're required to go back, pay that fee, go through the process again. You could limit the number of times you have to go back to the DRB before an appeal to the City Council. Mr. Ochoa is correct in that if it is something that's for redesign, the staff is reviewing that design all over again. So if you do want it, if you did want to reduce that fee, you would be subsidizing because we still do the work. So we could look at variations on either one of those.
But I understand that. But when you want to add a room to your house and you have to go back twice, and the cost of that review is $10,000 or $11,000, that's very excessive. That's my opinion. So, and can you repeat one more time what you mentioned about going the number of times that you can go back to the count? To design?
I have it in my head that it's 3 times, and staff just said that it might be, but you have to go back at least once before you can appeal to the council. So the design review board would say, go take it back for redesign. You go through that process, and then so you could change that policy and say, you go to design review. If design review board rejects it, you can appeal automatically to the council.
No, I think
an appeal fee, but
I think it's a good process to give them a chance to try to make it work and bring it back at least once or twice. But just because it's going to come back to council, it doesn't mean that they have to pay. Right now, they have to pay $15,000-$16,000 in order to get to that point to come to council. I think it's 3 times. You can reduce it to 2, and say after 2 times, first time is $5,500 or $5,300. Second time is whatever, $500-$600 or $1,000. Then the third time you have to appeal to council. When they appeal to council, do they have to pay a fee as well?
there is an appeal fee. Ben, I've forgotten.
What is the
$2,000.
Okay, see, the appeal to the council is $2,000, but the return for redesign is $5,300. That's where I'm
yes.
I don't know if this is going to take a little long. We can maybe agendize this, Mr. City Manager.
Certainly,
and bring it back.
We certainly can, but while we're all here, so just because we're here, and it would be ideal if we could bring it back as part of the hearing next week. Right now, if you were going to resubmit, it's another looking at fee number 26, 5339, slide number 25, or fee number 2526.
24, 25. And you see the difference between if you are submitting for 51 to 100 residential units, your fee is $7,499.
Right.
But if you want to add a room in front of your house that is more than 200 square feet, the fee is almost $5,340.
Right.
So that's where the...
Well, it's a reflection, I think, of the upfront cost to do the analysis. Once, if you're doing an apartment building, certain elements of it are going to be rather repetitive. You get above the human scale, and you've seen, this element of the elevation versus that, and so as you go on, there's a greater economy of scale.
That makes sense, but would it be legal, or would it be also fair to have someone who's building 100 units maybe subsidize our residents who are trying to do some work on their house?
Understanding that one group couldn't technically subsidize another group because you can require full cost recovery on that merchant builder, but they couldn't be charged in excess as a means of offsetting the cost to the single family homeowner. So that's why the council has the discretion to lower the amount to something less than the cost.
But you can call it that.
Right.
The end result is
the difference is picked up by the general
fund. I wouldn't call it
fund.
anything other than that. As Mr. City
It just goes into the general fund.
It's all about how you package it.
So that notion, I guess, what I would be asking to council for you to consider is that way we can, if it's possible to include it in the coming hearing, would be, you submit, is the redesign, maybe the first and only redesign is something less than the $5,300, because council has the ability to charge less than what the cost is. So if the cost is, and Armin, you'll have to correct me because I don't know what the recovery is at 5,300.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, if I may add, on fee number 26, as you may recall, in 2014 we did a fee study, so most of our fees are actually based on the cost analysis. So for that one, the cost was about $6,200, but I believe council decided to set it at $5,000 a few years ago, and then in the last couple of years we've been increasing it based on the CPI. So it is set at the $5,000 level, and the difference is the CPI adjustment.
But most of our fees are the same way. They're
Correct.
not almost all of our fees that has some sort of a subsidy in it. We're not recovering all of our costs
For those single-family homeowners, that's correct.
No, not just the design review.
Correct.
The rest of the fees that we have,
We don't collect 100%.
right? We don't collect everything. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here talking about irrevocable trust.
So my question would be to you, then, if there's...
How about the 100 units? Are we also recovering full or less than the full amount, or where are we at?
I'll have to ask Armin, but generally speaking, to the extent that it was a commercial development, a commercial council has directed us get 100% fee recovery.
And we can't go above.
You can't go above. But I think to the mayor's question, on a redesign, we break apart something here, as you see, it's fee number 25, 26, and say that for a amended design, a redesign, it's something less than 53. There would be nothing against, nothing keeping you from charging less than the 53, all the way down to zero, ostensibly, if that's what you wanted to do. And so it may sound like it's a lot to consider. It really isn't. It's really what is it council gets to make policy. For those folks that apply to DRB, if they get sent back for redesign and the council says, well, we shouldn't charge them $5,300, we should charge them $2,500 or whatever the number might be, and that we can do that, and we would adjust the fee schedule accordingly. My only suggestion would be to you, keep in the back of your mind, is that the lower you make that fee, perhaps more likely it becomes a less of a disincentive for somebody to be a little more hard-headed about what their submittal is. And so they say, no, I don't want to take your advice, or I don't want to have the DRB, I don't care what the DRB says, because if you drop it down to say zero, I'll just keep on resubmitting until I wear you down. So there's a sweet spot somewhere in there, and we can find that as a function of this fee.
I think also that may result in council being inundated with appeals from DRB, right?
Unless it goes to DRB and is approved at that level because somebody gets it right on the second time around, and then it doesn't come to you. It could theoretically even preclude appeals.
You're saying they're going to be hard-headed, which means that they're not going to...
If you drop it too low.
Right.
If you drop it too low.
And that'll ultimately result in council having to deal with it.
Effectively. So I think the question to council is, do you, as an amendment to the fee schedule, include a different fee, a new fee, that differentiates a redesign at something less than the 5339.
Right. So I just want to mention one other thing is there is a law, there is a rule that we have. I think it's 3 times they can go back to design review board, and after that, it automatically gets appealed to the council. That rule is in place, if I'm not mistaken. But just let's bear in mind that the fees 2-3 years ago or 4 years ago were less than $1,500, and we didn't have that notion of, let me go back 5 times so I can wear you down. I think people, again, when they come to design review, their intentions are positive. Their intentions are to get their project approved, move forward. Nobody has the time, and every time they come back, I mean, because the fees are low, if I want to come back, I still have to pay my architect, or whoever is the owner has to pay their architect and pay other fees to put things together and bring it resubmitted. So it's not that it's going to be all free. I don't want to. If the council doesn't have that, desire to reduce the fees, that's fine. But I don't think we need to make a decision based on assumption that if we do this, they're gonna. At that time, we can always increase it. I mean, It's just that's what I'm gonna say. I know we have a heavy agenda. So, how do we go about this issue now?
It's the council's pleasure. What would you? I mean, I think it's the dialogue amongst you here now.
Yeah. So, I have a thought, and I don't do any development, so the only input I've had is secondhand from developers who obviously want to keep costs low. But I think that if they resubmit a design that is approved by staff, then they should be given a discount on that permit fee. If they're going to submit something that's not approved by staff, then they should pay the full freight for it.
I'm not sure we can justify that legally. Because again, see, you're either doing it based on cost of service or not. If you're based it on whether it gets approved or not, then that justification for the fee loses its validity.
Presumably, something that's not in line with staff's recommendation would require extra time to review and to analyze. I mean, I think that would solve some of the things that we're talking about here. You don't want to give a freebie to see, am I going to hit it, get lucky this time before DRB, yet you don't want to penalize the guy who does everything that staff has asked them to do, and perhaps DRB if it's their second time around. And I've seen DRB put on different conditions. You come in exactly as you ask, and then they say, oh, well, add this and add that. I don't think we should penalize someone in that regard, but someone who's just hard-headed, who says, I don't care what you say, I'm going to throw this up there and see if it sticks, is a different situation than someone who's trying to.
Let me just add something to that, because we have two sets of approval. One is the staff level approval, right? That doesn't go to the DRB, and the other one is the DRB approval. And I think the cost is the same because DRB members are volunteers; they don't get paid. So the staff time that they allocate to any project is pretty much the same if they review it on staff level and give them approval.
I'm not sure about that because there's more, to get something ready for DRB. There's more staff time to prepare the report, notices, all that stuff.
Anyways, this is.
Can I suggest something?
Yes, go ahead.
I would suggest the first time when they come, they have to pay the full amount, whatever the cost is, and subsequent times should be much lower fees to be charged.
That's what I was saying.
But the first time they have to pay the expenses.
Yeah, the first time they pay the full fee, the entire amount, but the second time, that amount, do we have to decide that today here, or we can bring this back on?
Well, no, you can give us direction. If there's consensus on the council to do just that, we'll come back on the June 6th hearing and say, here's a range of fees.
Why don't we do that? I think that will make it easier for us to make a decision.
And can I just add, they can only come back twice, right? We're talking about they pay the first fee, the full fee, and then if we lower it the second time, that's okay, but then if it doesn't go through DRB, then they have to appeal. They appeal.
After the third time, they appeal to the council, yes?
So we're going to lower it twice, or?
Well, here I got a bit of a clarification. The Design Review Board cannot reject it on the first time, so they can ask for it to come back a second time. If on that second time they can reject it, or they can ask for it to come back for redesign a third time. If it comes back for redesign a third time, they have to make a decision.
So the second time, do they have to pay since they've been asked to bring it back?
The second time they have to pay. And if they get asked to come back a third time, they pay a third fee. Currently.
But I would tell you that to the council, and in the interest of moving forward, if we're doing, as I look at the frequencies that are here on the fee schedule, 15 times for projects under 15 or under 3,500 square feet, 8 times for projects over 3,500 square feet. I think you have the ability to experiment a bit, and if it's wrong, then we'll fix it at quarter or at mid-year because we're being overrun by folks that are running amok. And so the question then comes to councils. Do you take it to 75% of what this number is, or 50%, or 25%? And that really is entirely up to you.
So that's what you're going to bring us option next week?
Unless you want to tell me right now that you would, because what I'm going to bring you next week is here's what the fee is at 53.39, here's what it is at 75, 50, 25, and you guys make the same decision you could give us today.
About half the fee.
How about? Can I ask 2 questions? So this, what we're talking about, does this refer both to a commercial development and a residential?
I'm taking this as only single-family residential development.
Okay, so that's good. And the second part, what's the fiscal impact of this? Let's say we bring it down second time around to 50%. Can we get are we talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars?
No. I'm looking at this.
Like 20,000.
Yeah, like all in for both of these by like $40,000. So you can again,
20,000
you get
for
to
the
make you get to make policy.
I can vote on this.
Yeah. But you're giving us direction to bring it back next Tuesday.
Right. So my suggestion is to make it half, the second time and the third time to make it half. And after the third time, the design review has to make a decision. It's not up to the applicant to come back for the fourth time. They have to either reject it or they have to approve it. If it's rejected, then the applicant has a choice to appeal to the city council. So that's my suggestion. If there's a second for it, we can move forward in the interest of time.
Let me make a suggestion, and it's based on the assumption that the DRB is acting rationally. Wouldn't we want to set a lower fee for the first application and a higher fee for the second application, and then go that direction? So you want to get it right the first time, you want to get everything done as staff would recommend in the design studio, and then you come in at that lower fee?
I think that's what they're talking about.
Well, no, you're talking about going the other way.
Yeah.
You're talking about reducing it.
So you're saying like $2,500 for
Make
the
it
first
cheaper
time.
for everyone, give them the
second
incentive
one,
to get it
second
right
time.
the first time. But if there's a sticky issue or there's something like that, then it would justify a higher fee. I'm just throwing that out.
I would tell you that does have a cost implication. We probably experience 5 or 6 of these a year that we've been talking about, so we could absorb that $40,000. If we did every design review at a lower fee to try and encourage that would have a big
We don't
impact.
want to do that.
So you have the
We have your direction.
All right.
Not to mention that may cause accusations that somehow staff is causing these proposals to have to come back.
So let's move forward.
Then let's talk about the fees that council, some of the discussions that you had in the previous study session. Building and safety, there was this discussion about permit extensions and how does that, I'm sorry.
It's okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Continue.
Did you want to do the 115 discussion?
I guess we'll come back to, you want to come back to the 115 trust or do you want to do the 115 trust? It's your pleasure, sir.
How long would it take you to go through the fees?
I don't
Depends on the council.
Let's do the 115 trust. Let's do the
I'm so confused now. What are we on now?
We're on-
The pension, I know.
back to
Okay,
the one.
I know. So what
Okay,
are we on
just-
now?
How long would it take you to do through the fees? These are the fees that we have questions for.
Yeah, there's
Let's finish this, then we concentrate on
Okay.
115 trust.
Okay. We had the discussion that had come up about how do we deal with projects that drag out for extended amounts of time, and is there a means by which we can discourage people from just dragging a project out? And so here you see that we try to provide extensions in a reasonable way, but not try to have the system abused. The one or more extensions for periods not more than 180 days each. Obviously, this has happened in a couple of high-profile cases. We do allow them extensions for justifiable causes, and you see what those justifiable causes are here. Our goal, as it is with code enforcement, is compliance. We want people to comply. We don't want to be punitive necessarily. And so very few, as I mentioned, have gone beyond the 2 extensions, but we do have a couple of high-profile cases where that has been the case. So what we have in the fee study today, we're looking at the permit extension. The total cost is $155. The current fee is $155. We are proposing to take that to $158. That's what really caught the council's eye in terms of saying, well, is there a means of going beyond CPI and making it a source of discouragement? Really, I think when you look at if we have one needle in a haystack, are we setting a fee for that one exception? That is a policy consideration for the council because generally speaking, the change in the building code is as much of a discouragement, perhaps more of a discouragement than anything that we could possibly do. Beyond a certain point in time, if the project drags out and they are now subject to a new design review, as you have heard, or to a new building code, presuming that nothing in the design has changed, they may have to resubmit and absorb the full brunt of new fees. So I don't know that there would be an effective means by which you would put in place a fee for these 1 or 2 instances. That said, however, council could look at a couple different requests by possibly tweaking this notion of what the fee is. So, and you see in the middle when they're assessing a penalty or fine for the subsequent requests, you reduce the initial permit extension fee for less than the full cost recovery, but then it gets jacked up as folks are dragging it out if that ultimately is the case. Lastly, approving a building code amendment if it's by one permit extension once construction has commenced. So the big ticket there is once this is an active construction site, you give that one permit extension, and we keep the initial permit extension, the first one, relatively low, but then we come back and provide a very significant penalty or fine for subsequent requests. We can do that. I believe if there's any issue with that legally, Mr. City Attorney would correct us. But at this point, that fine or fee would be limited only to the advice of City Attorney, and I would imagine could mirror what we have on our.
I mean, as long as that we're within the range of what that cost of service is for that higher amount, then you're still okay. You're basically just lowering the baseline as opposed to raising the second level above what cost of service would be. So
how high do you think we could go, Armin?
That's the full cost.
Right. So basically,
so
you're
we're
just lowering the first
half.
one and keeping the second one in place, and that serves as the penalty.
What is that, the 155?
Correct.
158. Understanding that doesn't take into account a full, the full brunt of DRB if the design has changed, or the full brunt of the building permits if in fact the building code has changed because it's drug out for indeed so long.
The other alternatives are obviously to punish the condition, and in other words, penalize the condition that the property is in, as opposed to dealing with it in terms of the actual application fees for their extension, or, as I think is suggested on the next slide, having shorter time periods. But again, I think on that there'll be the issues that you're dealing with now in terms of complaints about one or two properties maybe going longer than anybody would have hoped. You'll probably get feedback on the other side from property owners who maybe have very legitimate reasons why they couldn't get their properties constructed in the time that's allowed, and you'll get folks who maybe complain that time is being shortened and it's going to be harmful to them. So that's something the council's going to have to weigh.
And I would just add to that, if we did limit to one, and it was a legitimate reason why construction did not happen, we would now require them to stop building, go back, design a new plan according to whatever code, plan check that. You may, in fact, delay the project by having them come back. So if it was, the second time around, it's a 3-month extension. It might take them 4 months to get through plan check and then restart. So that's something to consider with that last alternative.
Well, I don't know if I may, Mr. Mayor, I don't know if we should limit to one extension. I'm just looking at the ones that get, or have extensions or for 10 years. So, I don't object to 1, 2, 3 extensions, but and that's where I think we have to draw the line somewhere in the sand that there is a limit, and then after that. Then we look to our city attorney to take steps to either, somehow approach the owner and
then I think
make the appropriate stuff.
What we would ask of council then, by way of again council making policy, is really to adjust the way that we look at these. So because it's so rare. That we would say, okay, instead of trying to shepherd somebody along inch by painstaking inch, after that initial extension is expired, maybe then we move it straight into code enforcement, as opposed to trying to get somebody to complete their project. Really just presume that they're going to have a hard time completing it. Let's just move through the city prosecutor's office, because we have the administrative citation program really that could address it much more quickly. Doesn't necessarily well, you would still have, I'm sure, the heartbreaking story of the person that owns the property coming to you to say, well, here's all these terrible things that have happened to me. But at the same time, all the other residents are having to live with that eyesore. So if that's the council, if that's the sense of the council, what we would do is really just kind of change our enforcement strategy on those handful of projects to go straight from let's get you to complete your project to we're kicking it over to code enforcement.
And do we have to put a limit on it, or a time, or a number of extensions?
I think what we would do is keep the existing fees as you see them in the fee study, but again, instruct the Community Development Department that after they exhaust those the extensions, the reasonable, justifiable exemptions, we kick it over to code enforcement as opposed to trying to get somebody to get the project done.
But isn't that subjective, the reasonable and justifiable extensions? I mean, then you could have someone come in for 10 years with reasonable and
I think
justifiable.
that goes back to the notion of trying. Our strategy has been completion. If the strategy is no longer completion, but rather a healthy dose of code enforcement, of complying with code, that's the change. I mean, that therein lies the policy change. The council telling us this is less about trying to help this individual get their project done, and more about, well, okay, it's the well-being of the people surrounding them. That's a major significant difference.
Well, I think we have to find a balance. I think there has to be a balance where the developer or the homeowner who is trying to redo a home or just buys a home and is trying to fix it up does it in a reasonable time so that the neighbors don't have to. I can see, sometimes a build will take 2.5, 3 years. That's acceptable because I'm watching in my own neighborhood houses going up and it's taking them 2 years. That's fine, but 10 years is like just too long. And
How many cases do we have?
Just 2, I think.
Less than a handful. But I think that the point comes back because there are so many different variables, right? Something could take 3 years and it could be totally justified. It really comes down to the enforcement philosophy from the Community Development Department to say, okay, we're going to be reasonable, but the reasonableness has limitations by way of somebody that the property is just trapped in probate. It can never get out. There's a lawsuit between the parties, and it really is just dragging out to some unreasonable degree. That is a very significant difference and departure from where we are today. I would tell you that probably at least one of the projects that you've identified, had our enforcement philosophy been less of let's get these people done and try to usher them along, but rather we're going to kick it over to the city prosecutor's office, it wouldn't be 10 years. It probably would have been closer to those 2 or 3 years because it's been the same tale of woe on that particular project, just repeating itself like Groundhog Day. So as long as council is comfortable in directing us to say, change that philosophy, get to a point of compliance sooner, we can do that. We know what that looks like and what that means, because I think if we try to put a fence around what is reasonable, it's going to shift on case to case. But the code enforcement officers and building official will be able to do just what you're describing. But I don't want to undersell the idea that is a departure from where we've been. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
So I guess we have to.
Well, I mean, that's one more. If that's the sense of the council, we will bring that to the folks in code enforcement and building safety. Is that a fair direction from council?
I just don't want to make a drastic change because of 1 or 2 cases.
Right, correct.
And make a blanket ordinance that is going to affect everybody that is complying with the rules. So, so far, these 2 cases, we haven't been able to make them complete their project because of the reasons they had or what have
Sure.
Right? So, but there are 1 or 2 cases. I think we can come up with another idea as to how we're going to enforce our because they have to pull the permit within 6 months after the plan check is done. Mm-hmm. And then they have to start work after they pull the permit within 6 months. And after that is when they start dragging it. They do one foundation, they wait 6 months, and they do another permit.
They don't ask for another extension, so
it's not an extension. They're not asking for extension.
Well, no, they don't, and the house sits there. It sits there
so
for
that's
2 years.
something that you don't want to take away because of 1 or 2.
I would say in one of the cases that we're talking about, indeed, when the city attorney really pressed on it, that's when there was real attention to it. The permit has been pulled, and they should start construction. So we understand, at least I do, and I can relay to staff what you're trying to get at. For those that have legitimate, justifiable reasons to extend that, we will. But if you don't, we're going to ask you then, okay, return the property to its former state, take down those improvements, and give the neighborhood some.
That's what we're doing right now, right? That's what I'm asking.
That's what we're asking to do right now.
Yes.
Because heretofore we have not done that. It's just been let's get these folks, shepherd them along.
So he's saying what they will do is strengthen enforcement, and take bolder steps in enforcement
On cases that
are
deserve.
language.
That are unreasonable.
Yeah.
It's
You will
been
make
there
that
for
decision.
years and years.
You will make that decision what's reasonable and what's
That
not.
posture is different than where we have been up till now. It's just been, let's help these poor folks along, help them along, understanding that our largesse of reasonableness has been perhaps taken advantage of. So, instead of doing that, we will go towards a code enforcement solution. Okay. All right. I got an easy one here. Okay, mural fees.
So are we good on that one?
I understand your direction most definitely, ma'am. And I haven't seen the objection from council, so I'm going to move in that direction. Similar to what we just described by way of those DRB fees, you get to set that cost. You recall we don't have anything on the books, so we were using the sign program fee. We get about 2 of these applications a year, so I don't know that we would spend a great deal of time at this point identifying what the fee would be, because it just doesn't happen with great regularity. We can drop that cost. We can drop that fee down anything from $3,200 all the way down to $0. Really just depending on what council wants to try to achieve and facilitate. So if you have I think we would recommend $500. Do I hear 6? It's council's call. What would you like to charge for that fee? Or the full 32?
42.
Next slide. 32. Yeah, so, we could, to the extent of who looks at the fee, DRB, Arts and Culture Commission, DRB and Arts and Culture, but at the end of the day, it really comes down to how much you want to facilitate the advent of murals.
I think these are the options: 2,500, 1,500, or 500, or these are
No, it could be
those are
anything-
just suggestions.
anything as
Suggestions, yes.
lower than 3,200.
Can you give me an example as to what we're talking about?
Yes, on Victory and Allen, I believe. There is a business. They wanted to adorn their wall with a mural. They went ahead and did it, and we told them, no, you have to go through a design review process. And so do we just take it through DRB by way of a sign program? That's the most analogous thing we have. Or should that just be really the realm of Arts and Culture Commission? Or maybe it's both, because excuse me, the DRB folks will look at it from the signage perspective in terms of that public realm, and the arts people are looking for the artistic quality of it. So it's very, very open-ended. What would you like it to be, and what do you think the cost ought to be? And I think because there's so few of these that have come in, and as we've talked about previously, if suddenly we're inundated, we may come back at mid-year budget and say, council, all these people want to do murals. Maybe we should increase that fee to stem the tide a little bit. I just don't know that that's the case.
You know how many emails I've received on that particular issue?
Yes.
If it goes to Arts and Culture, will there be a public notice distributed to residents in the neighborhood? Or within that certain number of feet? Because I think we need to do that.
Whatever the radius would be, sure.
The neighbor's complaint is that we didn't know about this. Look what we're stuck with. If we give them a chance to at least interact and understand what the mural depicts,
Certainly.
what sort of response it's going to get from.
Absolutely. And then it still gets back to this question of what do you want the fee to be? Because we would do that, we would notify folks, we would do all that good stuff. But do we want to charge nothing, 500, 15, 25, 32?
Why you don't leave it to 3203, which is the cost at this time? What there's they're saying there has been 2 cases, so why we are spending this much time? So let's leave it with 3,203, which is proposed fee.
I'm okay with that.
I'm okay with that too.
Okay. Any other discussion, Mr. Mayor?
Sold.
And what zoning allows murals?
We would do it by way of the sign package. So this would be effectively in commercial zones.
Yeah, because there are commercial properties in residential neighborhoods.
Correct.
Those, I think, we have to be very careful. We don't want.
Most definitely.
I don't want to have a mural on a one piece of property that sits in the middle of a residential neighborhood. So that's something that we need to bring it up and discuss because
Certainly, that would indicate then that you want it to move through DRB as well as through arts and culture, and that's absolutely fine. I can think of
not the review process, the zoning of it. If it's C3, I don't know, dash 1 or C3 dash 3 versus just a C1, for example, because there are properties that are grandfathered in, they're commercial properties, they're sitting in residential neighborhoods. I wouldn't want to have a mural on those.
I think we can differentiate between those commercial uses on maybe they're existing non-conforming uses. I think where you're more apt to run into controversy, as Mr. Najarian's indicating, are commercial properties that abut a residential zone. So and so for example, I think of the little Columbus Village area. Across from Columbus Elementary, there is a business. There's a commercial building there with a little store.
Exactly.
Right. And if the owner of the business or the building wanted to have a mural on the side of their building, what I hear you saying is no, because that's in a residential zone. If that's the direction of the council, then what we would end up doing is bringing back to you those types of restrictions. But again, for today's purposes, is the fee. But is that a direction of the council?
Yeah, I have a question. Go ahead.
Didn't you say you will notify all the neighbors that this commercial building or whoever wants to do this?
Yes.
So let the residents to decide why we are getting involved with this.
That's why I'm asking the council. Yes, right.
The problem with that is you're gonna have a big fight every time something is coming in. If it's regulated in a residential neighborhood, I wouldn't want to have a mural looking at the mural from my backyard, and I don't think any of us would. But overall, I think in commercial areas it's fine. That's all commercial. But the commercial zoning that is grandfathered in a residential area, I think we can bring it back to discuss and make a decision at that time. But the fee stays the same. Okay, let's move forward, please.
So we had a discussion about parking. We had recommended that parking be the fee be increased in the garages. Question had come up as can we increase it further? And I think the back and forth among the council was okay. Well, who's parking in these spaces? And ultimately, are you incentivizing or disincentivizing based on what the cost would be? We look at the balance, if you will, between the visitors, the folks who are taking the monthly parking rates, which many times are employees in the downtown. And so, as you see in some of the areas to the north end of downtown, where the parking cost from private building owners, the cost that they levy on their own employees to park in the building on campus is so high, those employees will then cheat a little bit and go park in residential neighborhoods and walk back to their place of business. And so we're constantly trying to assess the balance and saying we want employees of downtown, regardless of where they're employed, but employees who work downtown to park in the downtown parking structures, not on the street, which is hopefully short-term, quick turnover parking, or worse, in our residential neighborhoods that abut downtown. So we try to find that balance between the parking lots, the garages, the rates, what have you. 2,000 employees in the downtown. The monthly rates for the 2,000 downtown employees is discounted compared to the visitor rates. So again, you buy in bulk, you buy a monthly pass. That's going to be cheaper than if you're just coming in for lunch. And the idea again is that we want to incentivize you to park in the parking structure if you were an employee downtown. So we had increased or proposed to increase $10 a month. It won't push the parkers, we don't believe, based on the analysis from the parking staff, that we won't, by increasing it, the recommended $10, that won't in and of itself push them out of the garages and to the on-street parking. So we feel comfortable with that $10. But then the question comes up, should it go higher? And I think the higher you go, the greater the risk that you will disincentivize the long-term or monthly parking in the parking structure.
So we're going from which dollar amount to which dollar amount? We're going from
actually, we're going from $60 to $70 for the marketplace, and $10 increase from $60 to $70 for the exchange parking, and for the Orange Street, it's from $50 to $60 per month.
And how much are the buildings charging?
Depends on the building.
90.
Yeah, some folks, like in the Nestle building, for example.
So we're just below.
Yeah. And you see kind of the distribution of where our parking spaces in downtown are. 15% are in the lots, 20% are on the streets, 65% are in the garages. And so I think that those series of ratios contributes to the dynamic that we're talking about. When you look at the rates being increased just on a moderate basis, and it really is a function of what the demand is, trying to make sure that we don't price ourselves out of the market. I think that's reflected here, but certainly council, again, gets to make that policy. We would continue to recommend the increase of the $10, but it's the council's call whether we go more or less or some other number. But that's basically it. Mr. Galanian is here. Mr. Dombrowski is here to answer any question from council.
I think that's fair. I mean, I'm okay.
We're okay with that, the 10? Yes,
I
sir.
would like to know, not for this budget session or next week, the net revenue resulting from adding an additional parking enforcement officer. For the IRS, for example, it's an extremely high revenue. You add an additional IRS revenue agent, the money that individual is able to recoup from unpaid taxes is very high. I'd like to know if we've done any studies, maybe audit can help us. Is there a net revenue gain for an additional parking officer? Everything fully burdened with PERS and health and all that.
As you know, we are contracting out elements of the parking enforcement program, so we will bring you back that report because it does have a function of that analysis.
And you know what? In general, there's been a lot of different policy discussions on parking in general. And this is a wide discussion, not just the revenue end here that we're looking at. But maybe at some point we can have another study on parking. Should you provide parking? Should you not provide parking? Should it be free? Should it be expensive? And that's a big discussion. Maybe at some point down the line, as we're talking about planning, we can throw that into our...
Yes, sir.
And I have a question, Mr. Mayor. Now, we're not renting to the auto dealerships any longer?
I believe at this point we have effectively squeezed them out. Are there any back in there, Rubik?
Mr. Mayor, Member of City Council, Councilwoman Devine, we only currently have, actually soon, 100 cars that will be parked at Maryland. We used to have 300 BMWs that were parked at Maryland that have already left, so it created capacity. At the Orange and Exchange, we don't have any car dealers' cars.
Where are they taking their cars?
Probably outside the city limits, across the tracks to LA.
And are these the cars that are on Maryland in that parking structure? Are they paying the same rate as?
They will be paying the monthly rate of $70 a month. Yes.
Okay.
But the condition is if we see a need for more capacity, we can squeeze them out at any given time.
Let's move forward, sir. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Last but not least, Mr. Mayor, members of council, we have the police department alarm fees. And so you see here kind of what the strategy has been. So we want to reduce false alarms, maximizing police effectiveness because we roll units on false alarms. So the idea that if you don't have any false alarms, we'll waive the permit fee, and ostensibly we reward the quote-unquote good behavior. And you know, if we get the first one free, the second one, if you get if the alarm, you complete the alarm operations class, and I'm sure Chief and Deputy Chief can give you details about said class. But the idea being that if we have an ongoing number of false alarms, the quote-unquote bad behavior, then we do assess increasing graduated fees to cover that cost, because it's effectively a loss of resource if we're sending units to false alarms. And keep in mind, too, I guess that last point is actually quite important. If we determine that there was an intrusion, there's evidence of an intrusion, we don't charge anybody for that. That's the police department doing its job. So we take a look at what the cost is and how we calculate that cost. The cost per response is $761 almost and 95 cents. We have almost 3,000 responses to false alarms in 15-16, and that costs about $2.2 million, or the equivalent of about 12 police officer positions. So you see the spread between commercial and residential alarms. You saw the number on the previous slide. This is the breakout over the last several years. When you look at the mix between the commercial and the residential, I think right here when you look at residential, it's relatively steady. It's starting to creep up. Perhaps a reflection of more folks installing alarms by way of the impact from AB 103 and Prop 47, and very much a stable environment by way of the commercial alarms. I will give a lot of credit to the folks on Brand Boulevard Cars. We still have some frequent flyers there, but a lot of times we get a tremendous amount of false alarms from the auto dealers, the night crew coming in, cleaning, and ultimately setting off those alarms. But through education, they have done a good job of abating that problem.
So of the, if I may, Mr. Mayor, of the $2.2 million in cost per year, how much of it do we recover in the form of penalties, or do we?
That's a good question. I would have to defer back to
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. I believe it's from the false alarm revenues.
Yeah.
It's between $400,000 to $500,000 a year.
Okay.
Rough estimate.
Okay.
When you see staffing levels and the cost per resident, this is something council is used to seeing. I think we're very proud of it. You see that we get tremendous value when you look at our surrounding cities. We don't even include LA on this list, but because I think it just kind of blows everything out of the water by way of their number of officers per capita. But here you see at Glendale, 1.2 sworn officers per 1,000 population, well less than the 1.5 or 1.7 in Pasadena and Burbank, respectively. So the idea being that we do our best both on both public safety departments to wring as much value as we can out of the significant budgets that they have. They're the two biggest budgets in the general fund. When you look at this is just another representation of those numbers you saw on the previous slide. On the left-hand side, Glendale doing a great deal more, and you look at the crime stats, seeing is believing. We get a tremendous amount of value out of a relatively smaller amount of people, certainly when you look at the per capita numbers than Burbank or Pasadena. But the way that we're able to do that is cost control, and so we try to minimize the number of false alarms. So what happens when we have a false alarm? Well, dispatch gets that call. They end up verifying it with the alarm company. We dispatch the officers, and you see there 18% of the time we do utilize air support. That happens especially in areas of the city that are a little more remote that end up with the air unit is able to get there more quickly. And so we end up exhausting about 22 minutes of officer time for each 2.5 officers that end up getting sent to these calls. So it is a significant allocation of resources, and I think you see that based on council's previous direction when you look at what the fees are. So across the top, you see the residential and commercial with a permit. Oh, yes, ma'am?
Oh, no.
Well,
I have a question. So this, of course, we're talking about the cost associated with providing this service in relation to false alarms, but we're not juxtaposing that against the time that we save in not having to deal with actual burglaries that would result from actual alarm, in the absence of alarms being there. Actual burglaries will have a cost associated with it, with police having to deal with it. Sure. And I'm guessing there's some kind of a loss of wealth to the city in the aggregate, right? So there's that uncalculated benefit
Sure.
of people actually getting alarms. And, this comes with the territory, false alarms. We want to discourage them, but all I'm saying is that it's not like an all negative thing.
And I think that's a very interesting point, something that we would like to study a bit further, because I think we kind of get at that type of calculus by way of this chart that shows you if you install an alarm system and you come in and get a permit, as opposed to not getting a permit, we're able to, and you see the reflection in what the proposed fees are and what the total cost is. Total cost remains the same, but the idea being that if you have a permit, meaning that you've registered with us, we know who you are, we know where you are, we know all of your numbers, we can effectively short-circuit that false alarm before we ever have to expend those resources, and thus plow them back into other calls for service abating that negative calculus that I think you're describing. We want folks to register with us and come in and get that permit because it's a better use of our time. Understanding, as you point out, false alarms are going to happen. The world's an imperfect place. But to the extent we have more information and better familiarity with you and your system, we can eliminate or at least greatly abate that loss of resource. That's a great point that you make. So this is what we have in the fee study. Yes, sir.
Yes, Mr. Elgin.
Okay, these are false alarm. How about the real one? How many times that happens? That they call and it's a real call?
Yeah, when we actually go out there and there's an intruder, I don't know, Chief, if you want to come up and address that one.
We don't have an exact number to track on that. When an alarm activation goes off, officers respond and they find out it's a true break-in, the call gets changed to a burglary. So we have to look at it. What we can best tell is it's about 2% of the alarm calls we get. So we're getting 3,000 alarm calls a year that we're false alarms we're responding on. That doesn't even count an additional 900 that we get where the dispatch receives it, we send officers, we send maybe the helicopter, and before they arrive on the scene, the resident or the alarm company calls us and says, never mind. We've already displaced our resources, but we don't even get to capture that back. So it's an additional almost 1,000 false alarm calls we're getting again. But most of the alarm calls, and it's true for most cities, it's about 1% or 2% that are actually valid burglaries, true burglaries when we get the call to go out there. But when we do, we investigate it and they don't get charged for it. We're seeing an increase in people putting in alarms, and I think Mr. Ochoa is right on. That's something that we profess when we talk to our neighborhood associations about what can we do to help, and that is install an alarm and then get the alarm working properly. So they get the 2 free ones. If in a year they don't have any false alarms, we waive the registration for the upcoming year. So we're encouraging alarms, but we encourage them to be used properly. 12 officers. This was amazing. You know how much more God's work we could do in public safety with 12 additional officers unencumbered out there? I mean, it would be tremendous. So it is a major drain. I can tell you some other cities have gone to verified false alarms. They don't even send officers unless the alarm company or the resident or somebody verifies there's something going on at the residence. Not looking to maybe go to that extreme, but some cities have had to say, with the limited resources we have after the recession and the increase in crime that's going up across the nation and particularly in California, what's the best use of our resources?
Mm-hmm. I have a question, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Mom.
The number of the frequency with permits, first alarm, 1,520. That's pretty. How many alarms do you think, or do you have any number of how many we are registered or permitted each year? That we have 1,500 false alarms?
8,000, and we recently have gone out and we contract out our alarm service now. We used to do it in-house due to staffing reductions. We now have a company that does it, so they're more proactive in getting the alarms permitted as well as collecting or getting people to learn how to use the alarm properly so that we're not having as many false alarms. Okay. But when you look at it, we have like 8,000 registered right now.
That's a pretty low percentage then when you look at the number that we have. Do you suppose that the frequency is due to them, the first alarm is the fact that they're just kind of learning how to use the alarm and they forget, or
there's a number,
because it goes down so drastically on the second?
Yeah, there's a number of factors. Some of it is news. Some of it is, family members, service people coming. When we have windstorms and we're getting a bunch of alarms, we are, conscious of that. And some alarms are going to be going off. We try to be very reasonable when somebody does call and want to contest why the alarm went off. We're reasonable about what they want to do. We want the alarms to be in place. As a police chief, I like having people to have those kind of resources. It does work. And we have a lot of cases where an alarm has gone off or neighbors now see something and call us, and we actually catch a lot of burglars that were coming into our community in recent times. And now the alarm system, the prices are coming down. The use of cameras are tremendous. We had a resident call from work that an activation, they looked on their phone, they could see on the camera people breaking into the house. We were able to converge on the location and take the individuals into custody.
So then let me ask you one more question. So you have no objection to the first alarm call, false alarm, being free?
No.
Okay.
And then the second one, now with our contractor, they can go online, take a class. They finish the class. It's free. We even waive the second one for them. So it's not until the third one that they're going to start paying for something. And if they don't have any false alarms, they don't even have to pay the registration fee the following year.
I think that's great. I mean, that's great. Structured very well for our residents, for our safety. I think we stick with it. It works perfectly. And one more thing, just on the issue of the isolated areas and the response to alarms. I used to live in Emerald Isle, one of those exactly geographically very isolated areas for 15 years. And my alarm has gone off a couple of times in those 15 years, as you may expect. And the response is just amazing. I mean, God have mercy on you if you're a burglar and you set off an alarm. Because our PD will be on you through air, through ground. Really just unbelievable response.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move forward. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Then the only other thing was the schedule, the budget adoption calendar. Of course, we had mentioned June 6th is the hearing. Then the council's actual vote on the upcoming fiscal year's budget would not be until June 13th. So by charter, we have the 6th hearing, and then we have the vote on the 13th. So today is all about questions, answers, direction. The only remaining item that we have from notes from council discussion at this point was fees and the discussion on the PERS trust. So at this point, we would ask for any direction that the council has related to any of these matters.
Are we going back to?
Yeah, aren't we?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So who wants
I
to
have
go
a question.
Go ahead.
On the slide 16, which was you're offering to invest $35 million in PERS, this is just will be one time.
Yes.
There is no
Correct.
other something that will be added to it.
That's correct, sir.
This is one-time investment.
Absolutely, yes. Unless council wants to put more in some other way, but we're hopeful that would never be the case because of the investment earnings in this trust. So the short answer, yes, one time only.
Bear in mind that it was from the excess redevelopment loan payment, so it's really only a one-time resource that we're able to do this.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Mayor. So, Mr. Ochoa, you're looking for some direction at this point?
As to whether or not we should include it in the budget hearing next week.
Okay. Well, speaking for myself, I think I've been pretty clear. I fully support the staff recommendation of depositing the $24 million into the pension rate stabilization program. If any of my colleagues see any danger in that or have any issues, I'd like to hear it now so we can discuss it. Maybe I'm not seeing what they're seeing, but please point it out to me now so I can get my head around, because I really see this as a very appropriate way to get an increase in return on this large chunk of money that's sitting out there, which will just help defray somewhat our monumental PERS increases that we're going to face in the next 20 years.
I just want to say that I think that moving forward with this sort of trust fund is fiscally responsible, and I also think that we have to, as a council, we have to look to the future and try to ensure that that the city is prepared, even if we're not here, that we've done something while we are here that is going to protect the city in the worst case scenario. So I am with Council Member Najarian on this one. I think it's a progressive plan. I think more cities are becoming involved in this kind of investment, and I would hope that we can also move forward with this.
Councilmember Sinania?
I missed the last 2 minutes, but I can assume. I understand sort of fiscally, financially, it makes sense in the long term, and I understand that this is a long-term investment. If you look at the way the investment grows, or sometimes doesn't, in a 1 year or 2 year period, the numbers are distorted. So you need to look at this over the long period of time. I am still concerned with taking out such a large chunk of money from our reserve in light of the uncertainty with the transfer lawsuit. So that's where I am. I'm sort of not fully committed.
Councilmember Marjani?
Are we deciding it now?
We are discussing it.
So I'm in process of studying it right now. There are two issues that I have some sort of concern about. Is one being that we are lowering our reserve to 20%, and it's on the list. Most of the cities, they are within that range, 20 or lower, except Englewood, which they have percentage of reserve was 25%. I'm studying to see the impact of, if we keep the 25% line, what will be the impact of it, or this investment, how it's going to affect to shave off the curve. So I don't want to say anything at this moment, except those are my concerns at this moment, so I have to study and educate myself before I answer more directly. And one more thing, yes. I'm sorry. Previously, I guess you brought the issue that I asked the staff was if we would have a parking lot for the same amount, which one would generate more money? Whether to do this will generate, we will be better off, or to go and have like a parking lot. That's what
right,
brought up.
Let me just elaborate
so
I
wanted to have an answer to that too.
Okay. I think what my issue is that this was combined with our entire budget, and we voted on this issue once, and it was supposed to come back as a standalone item, if you will, so we can discuss it in a more wide variety of different issues that we have. And I received this booklet yesterday, and I want to thank the gentleman who came from PARS, and we had an hour briefing yesterday. So I'm on the fence on this issue. If I have to vote on it today, I vote against it today. But I'm willing to have another. It does not have to be part of our budget today, right? It can be a separate item. So that's what I would like to do. And also reducing our reserves to 20% is concerning to me. And I asked the question, if this option is there, why isn't PERS using the same options? Why isn't PERS going towards the same direction and investing in the same funds? So we won't have to be in this position. If PERS makes 5 to 7% a year, we don't have to cough up $50, $60, or $80 million a year. So, but I don't know why, but they haven't done it. And when I look at the numbers, it's 2008 this fund lost 22%, and 2009 it gained 21%. So the fluctuation is there. It's not that it's very, very stable, and this is the moderate one as well. So I want to make sure that we do the right thing. And as far as my other issue is that $35 million we're investing today, I understand that it's liquid. We can take it out and use for PERS liability anytime. But if we invest that money into something else, like a few parking structures, the amount of money that we can generate in 10 years, I want to see what that would equal to. And also after 10 years, we are exhausting all of these accounts. We're going to close this account down and spend that $60 million. $35 million investment, $25 million revenues or interest that we're going to receive. That after 10 years, that $60 million is gone. But if we can manage this in a different way, manage our money in a different way, so we can generate money, maybe not as much, but after 10 years, we still have those revenue sources for another 10, 15, 20 years. It's, I was talking to somebody the other day. It says, this idea is a great idea, but it's like when you get a gift card from somebody. It's like you take a cash that's good everywhere. You buy a gift card from a department store. in the hope of having 20% discount from that department. But you can only spend it in that department store, and that's somehow what this is somewhat geared towards, that we put this money in an account and we can only spend it for PERS. So again, I'm on the fence. I think we need to bring this back and discuss it further and see if we can maybe have a hybrid one and invest some in PERS and invest the rest of our money into something else as well. That's where I stand.
Can we have staff address whatever concerns the mayor had?
Well, I mean, in fairness to the mayor, I guess we'd have to look further at such an alternative. I can tell you that PERS is so far behind the eight ball. They're actually looking to borrow money to invest to try to reach these types of returns. But I will also tell you that PERS, one of the reasons why PERS got in trouble was making investments in real estate holdings. Maybe I couldn't swear that in terms of parking lots or office parks, whatever the case, but the idea of commercial real estate into real estate investment trusts, and the fluctuation that occurs in that market as opposed to something that we can see, going back over the last 100 years in equities and bonds and other structured investments. Would I think the long term would tell you that that's more stable if you're willing to park it there over a period of time. Things like driverless cars, things like the advent of services like Uber and Lyft may have a significant unforeseen impact on something as structured and truly concrete, literally concrete as a parking structure. And so to the extent that what council has asked for is to provide you an option wherein you are in control. You have the ability to liquidate this year or not this year. You have an opportunity to use those funds when you see fit, parking them in a fixed asset, real estate or some other type of parking structure. Once it's there, it's there. And I would submit to you that you have a harder time getting out of such an investment. Now,
can you tell us what is our parking revenue from one of our parking structures that we have? Like the one on exchange, not exchange, the other one, marketplace.
I believe on average it's about a few $100,000 per year. So in the downtown area, it's, I want to say, about 200, maybe to 250,000, depending on the space. And on average, per space, the revenue that we generate is between $700 to $1,000. And again, these are just average numbers. So if we have a structure of 200 spaces, then that'll give us the revenues that
keeping in mind that with the bond proceeds that you have at your disposal, you're looking at creating a significant parking structure, maybe even two, depending on how the council wants to utilize funds. One in Central Park at the southern end of downtown, and another possibly in the central part of the downtown area. And so even outside of these $35 million in one-time proceeds, one-time bond proceeds that you're already looking at channeling into parking, first and foremost as a needed amenity in the downtown, as opposed to an investment vehicle.
But if you look at the numbers that we have is with 90 minutes free, right? That's included in there. That first 9 minutes is free. But if you look at the demand in parking, that's going to increase. I know that we're all talking about Uber and Lyft and everything else that's coming, but not everybody's using it. It is still a call culture. It's not going to go away for another 25 years. So if you have a parking structure, it's just 1,500 spaces, and you're collecting in 5 years, that $70 that we have with the CPIs that we have is going to be $100 a month. If you have 1,500 spaces, $100 a month, it's $150,000 a month. Times 12, you do the math, it's 1.8 million. 10 years, it's $18 million. So, and after 10 years, you still have that asset that you can use or you can leverage against, and you can still drain it. But the parking lot was one of the ideas. It's not It's not just. I'm not saying let's go put all this $35 million in building a parking lot tomorrow. But that's an idea as to if we can do a hybrid. But I cannot make that decision today. So I wanted to see if we can bring this back and discuss it further.
Mr.
With
Mayor,
more information. Yes.
You know, we've been through this. I think it's time to make a decision in the near future. I mean, a parking lot is the most illiquid asset you can get, fraught with liabilities and management issues and real estate development. You know, I don't want to call this a no-brainer, but I see this as a very favorable investment for the city's future. I mean, I'm waiting to hear what, you know, a true argument against this. It's totally liquid in the sense that, oh, we're drawing down our reserves. Well, in reality, our reserves are still there. We've just moved it over to another vehicle. It's not perhaps permitted to be classified as true reserve, but it's sitting there at the discretion of the city council to move around as we wish. So please, I mean, I want you to convince me as to why this is a bad idea. I really do, because I'm getting frustrated. I see this as a very opportune vehicle for us to knock off some of that PERS increase.
And if I may, another, you know, I looked at the pros and the cons of doing this, and one of the pros that I thought was important to our city when we think about projects that are coming forward in the future, where, you know, our credit rating is going to be important, an important part of the negotiations or the decisions that we make. One of the pros was that depositing assets in a trust will maintain, right now I think our rating is double A. And we could go to a AAA credit rating, which could help us in the future. So that's another way that this would help us.
I mean, $35 million having an account is going to go from AA to AAA, and if you don't invest it, it won't go to AAA?
Mr. Let's see.
Where are you reading from?
I'm reading from the report that we got yesterday.
Oh.
Mr. Bank Barker, can you help me on this one?
And before Mitch comes up, I would say there's a lot of factors that go into your credit rating, right. But the rating agencies would look favorable if you have money set aside to address that future liability. Could only help in terms of credit rating. It may not push us back up to a AAA that we once were, but we're close. I think we're AA plus.
And I also think I remember from the briefing that we had that PERS is actually looking into doing a similar program like this.
I think they're looking to borrow that money to then try to prepay.
PERS actually looked at setting a Section 115 trust up, and I believe their board voted it down for various reasons.
Okay. And currently there are like 91 cities, groups that are using this type of program to offset.
Cities, counties, school districts, special districts. This was something that was a little bit unique when we had brought it to you previously. I think as the universe of options has been squeezed, more cities are looking at following this lead as something that satisfies those very things that you've heard from council. They want control, they want liquidity, they want something that addresses their long-term liabilities with long-term assets impacting long-term credit ratings.
So go ahead. So just to get this clear, we invest this money in this account. It's an irrevocable trust, but the money can be used towards paying off pension obligations. That means that in any given year, all we have to do is basically use those funds that are in this irrevocable trust to make our normal, everyday pension obligation payments, and use those funds that would otherwise be used for that purpose to to plug a gap that's there.
All or part, correct. And if you recall
that's what you mean by right?
Yeah, by being liquid, right?
Okay.
As you recall, the game plan was to actually fund the trust, let it earn interest, and then slowly draw down the interest and the principal over those years to shave off that top. But you could, as you say, draw our pension cost right now is about $50 million. We could pull that 35 plus up to that annual cost. Some would argue, Mitch would tell you, that you could take out the previous years as well, so you may have access to 2 years worth of pension costs. So at any time, maybe up to $100 million could be pulled out fairly quickly.
$200 million?
Up to $100 million or whatever, twice our annual pension cost is. I mean, we've been saying it's a year because we're looking at a year at a time, but with a $50 million and growing pension cost, it would take quite a while before we'd have to access the entire.
Exactly. That's what I was going to go to. I mean, let's say third year, if you need this money, you're going to take it out and spend it on PERS. But the way it's calculated here, the first year that you can draw down and really shave off the top is year 24, 25, and that's $1 million off the top. So you have to keep this in that account for 7 years. And in order for it to generate enough for you to start shaving off the top of those liabilities by $1 million in 24, 20, 25. And within this 7 years, if you have, I was just mentioning this yesterday, the stock market overall is very dependent on foreign policies that we make. And
are you scaring us with the current situation?
No, I mean, look, every administration that we had went to war once. If this thing happens, and I cannot just put myself in that position to lose 25% of these funds in next 3, 4, 5 years before it generates enough income to start helping me on the PERS liabilities. But you can do something else. You can do a hybrid one. That's what I'm saying. I'm not ready to vote for it today. If they want to bring it back and talk about it, it's okay. If not, we can take it.
Two questions. Does that mean that for 7 years, let's say there is an emergency and we need to plug a gap, does that mean for 7 years we can't?
No, you can't. If you have it in your account, you can do the same thing and do other things with that money too.
That's the risk that you take. Then you want the benefit of investing.
If you wanted it absolutely liquid, you would keep it with the city treasury and earn a 1.5.
Yeah.
Or go towards something else. That's why I said one of the other options could be establish the trust, and instead of putting it in moderate, looking to recoup 5%, maybe put it in conservative. And then you come back in a couple of years and try to determine, all right, well, what's likely to happen in the world that we live in. Even doing that would be earning you more than the 1.6 that Rafi is getting in his portfolio, because that's what he's allowed. It all has to be safety, liquidity, and yield. The difference here is liquidity. By way of being part of a larger investment, we're able to park that money for a longer period of time. So that the goal, is actually not to touch this for 7 years. Heck, if we could not touch it for 8 or 9 or 10 years, that would be ideal because the interest just continues to compound.
No, so which brings me to my second question is the projection that's been given to us. I mean, the projection upon which we're basing this model obviously takes into account all the wars that we've had to fight over the last 10, 20 years, I assume, right? I mean, because it's based on some empirical information. So is that the case? I mean, is this projection created in a vacuum, or is it created on historic?
Sir. We use the moderate portfolio, which is the middle of the road of the 5 portfolios offered by Highmark, and their 5-year rate of return on that moderate portfolio is 6.34. So we only assume 5. So to be a little bit conservative, their 10-year benchmark has been 4.97. They're currently making 6.44%.
And with the 10-year benchmark being part of the Great Recession.
Yeah.
Right.
So again, that's my question. There may be a year when, let's say, assuming foreign policy has a huge impact on internal investments, there may be a year when those investments take a dip, but over the life of the investment,
that's correct.
The projection is 5.8% or whatever it is.
That's correct.
Per annum.
Yes. And the idea, and then on the flip side of the equation, is that you know what the future looks like by way of those PERS costs. You know that obligation is going to be there, barring some presumably beneficial action by the state of California or the voters of California or whatever the case is to alleviate that burden. But all that would be to the benefit of the city, not to the detriment. Meaning that somehow the pension promise was abated, lessened, removed. If that happened at a state level or on a statewide level, that would stretch your dollars that much further. But at the very least, to be conservative, you have these obligations come hell or high water.
And currently our annual our annual the pension obligations are paid out of the general fund.
Both general fund
all
and
the
non-general funds, depending on where the staff
It
is
originates.
housed.
Okay, got it. Okay. Thank you.
I think one positive thing about to invest will be, of course, I still have to study it, that at any time we see it's not going in our favor or there is a danger of not making any money, we can pay that money toward the PERS and keep the same amount of money will be in general fund. So we don't have to take the money from general fund and pay for that.
Correct.
That's right. But let me just reiterate on this that in 2008, this fund lost 22.8%, and when you lose 22.8% of $35 million, you do the math, it's like $9 million. And next year it made 21%, but it's 21% of 35% minus 9. And if you have one of these hiccups on the road, I don't know. I don't know how you're going to recoup. And same thing happened with PERS. They thought they're going to make forever 7% or 8% or 9%, and now look where we are. So that's where I'm at.
But I think it's worth noting that that 2008 number was the worst year of any year going back to the Great Recession.
Sure, but in the same year, PERS lost 2.9% when this fund lost 22%.
And
Same year in 2008.
There's a difference in the investments too, isn't there, between PERS and this?
No, I know. Yeah, of course there is. That's why I was saying, if this fund is making so much money, why isn't PERS investing in this fund?
Indeed, they will, as Bob had indicated, they will try different things as directed and pushed by the governor's office. But I think your question speaks back to this notion of local control. There are a number of things that PERS can do that make a lot of sense that ultimately they can't just by virtue of the type of animal that they are with the political pressures that they have. So rather than give PERS $35 million and lower our unfunded actuarial liability by $35 million, we would say do not do that. Our actuary would tell you, and our investment folks would tell you, don't do that because you don't have control over what they invest in, as you point out very accurately. The goal for us is to say, what do we have that is near to us that we can influence and we can control, and that would be a separate trust that the council can tap at any time for those retirement costs, and then backfill the amount back into the general fund. And so you have this obligation. Again, the clearest analogy I can give you is that it's a rainy day fund. You know it's going to be raining in 23 through 2040. And so set that money aside and let it accrue interest, as opposed to using it and spending it, because as you would, I'm sure, in your household, I can certainly say from my standpoint, no matter how much Sophia and I say we're going to take this money, we're going to set it aside, and we're only going to hold it, we're going to use it for this, that, or the other. Invariably, it has a way of leaking out into an improvement to the house here, or the kids' college fund there, or a car repair in some other place. To the extent you put it away into that savings account and hold it for those obligations that will come, that is at the end of the day, that's what we're recommending to you. That's all that we're recommending. And then there are variations on how to do that. Do you put less money in? Do you put it in a more conservative fund? Do you put it in and structure it in such a way that it will be liquidated at the end of year 2 or at the end of year 3, unless the council decides no, we're going to.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Maybe they should come back for us to decide all this different terms for it.
Well, we have. That's the kind of the purpose of the discussion, and with respect to the council, I think Mr. Najarian's point's well taken. That since February we had this general kind of discussion. I think we've sliced and diced this item in many different ways, and so we get to a point of saying we can have the discussion, or we can bring it back. Either bring it back next week as part of the budget discussion. You still have to vote on it on the 13th, or we'll bring it back next February as part of midyear, or never. But ultimately, it's council's prerogative. It's the policy you get to make. This is simply reflecting what our best recommendation to you is, based on all the fluctuations that we have seen dealing with PERS, at least in my career, going back 24 years. trying to figure a way to give yourself maximum latitude, maximum discretion, and still do the right and responsible thing of putting money away such that you can't just piddle it away on anything that might come up in the course of a year. That's all.
Okay.
So will we be bringing this back?
Is this going to be a separate item under the budget, or is it going to be under one?
The mayor's point's well taken, that it does not have to be part of the budget, but
that's what I'm saying. It doesn't have to be part of the budget.
And so that money is just sitting there in the general fund undesignated balance right now. So if you're going to do it, having had the discussions that we've had over the last 5 months, let's say do it, and we can do it as part of the budget. You have to set it up on the quarter. You just can't do it in any given month, so we would do it as part of the quarter. So if you're going to do it, then I would do it sooner than not. If you're not going to do it, then we'll bring it back if and when council ever has an appetite.
It's not a matter of if we want to do it or not. If we want to do it, bring it back to, so we will see all the terms and different options that we have. Maybe put less money, maybe put it in a conservative account. That's why I'm asking to bring it back. Maybe right after we come back from the summer vacation or whenever that our next meeting is in June or July. In July, maybe at that time we could have another hour or two to discuss it. This is not a small amount. I mean, by just making a decision today, or next week, I don't think we're doing the right thing or the fair thing. So by bringing it back next month, I don't think we're going to lose that much, because this, by the time they set it up, by the time it goes back and forth, by the time you have, in 5 years, you can draw $1 million from it, from the interest. What is a month going to do? So that's where I'm at.
I look at it as every day that we don't invest is money lost. Do we need a motion to whether to bring this back or not?
We would just be looking for direction similar to what you've given us before, whether or not we bring it back as part of the hearing. Because if the council would vote on it on the 13th, it should be part of the hearing. If not, then we would bring it back, as the mayor indicates, in July. I would submit to you that the fine granular details about how the trust is actually constructed would be pursuant to a council direction. Yes, staff, go set up this trust. We would bring back to you the trust agreement. Council would bless that trust agreement, and we would move forward from there. However, that is a significant investment of time from the folks at PARS and Highmark, from the staff. So if the council isn't sure about wanting to move forward in this direction, then I would suggest that you table it. If the council is saying, yeah, we are going to set up the trust, and maybe we don't put the full amount in, or maybe we put it into a more conservative profile for the risk assessment, then we would certainly bring it back to you in July, or sometime in July, presumably, maybe August, with the actual trust instrument. But if we really don't have any desire to do this, or there's not 3 votes to do it, then it would be a waste of your time, because at this point, I think you know what the dynamics kind of are.
I mean, if you bring it back in July or in early August with different options, then I would be all for it. But today, if I have to make a decision today, I can't make that decision.
You don't have to make a decision today. You have to give us. We would ask that you would give us direction, whether or not.
That's my direction. Now there's 5 people here that can take a vote. So,
Mr. Mayor, I'm talking about myself now. If you can provide me with a situation, the alternative, if we would have, the minimum with a reserve of 25%, if you can give me a figure to see how it will affect that shaving off the top of the curve. If I can have that, I can decide on June 13th to vote. I'm ready to vote on June 13th.
So the direction would be, instead of lowering the reserve to 20%, lower it to 25%. What does that do to these dynamics? Certainly, we can give you that.
So then, does it look like the direction is to that we should move forward with this, and then staff bring us back the options?
It's kind of, I'll tell you, I want to tell you, yes, I'm also in agreement, bring it back for vote. It's kind of a weird request staff is asking us, because it sounds like you're saying, are you going to vote for it? If you're going to vote for it, tell us so we can bring it back. I mean,
What
if we want to
I'm
vote
saying-
for it, maybe we take a vote right now and we just be done with it. But I understand that staff report's not ready. So, I mean, without, telling you we're fully committed, at the same time, I do want the staff report to come back so we can vote on it.
I think maybe I overstated my point. If you're saying set up a trust, don't put $35 million in over the next couple of years. Put $5 million, $10 million, $15 million, something. But we will establish this trust, and we'll seed it with $10. Okay, then we can do that. I'm asking, do you want to set up the trust? Regardless of how much you put in, regardless if it's high, moderate, or very conservative, or if you want to be able to liquidate it on a regular basis, do you want to set up the trust? That's all I'm saying.
Okay, I want to set up the trust, but I want to have these options to come back to see how much are we going to put in and what are the options in July. I'm okay with setting up the trust,
Okay.
but as far as options of how much money are we going to put in from the beginning, that's something that I want to discuss. I'm not ready to say it's $35 million today, $20 million today.
Fair enough.
That's where I stand. I'm okay with setting up the trust, but the terms to come back in July and we discuss and make a decision on it. Are you okay with it?
Yes, I'm
So, Jenna, are you okay with it?
I was okay with
Then you need to do both. I mean, it just seems to me at that point you still have to have the discussion at June 6th hearing and take some action on the 13th, and then it would come back on July, versus maybe just providing that additional information for council to decide.
No, we want to vote on it on the 13th to set up the account, and then the terms of the account will be discussed in July.
Is that what you had in mind, Mr. Ochoa?
I think at this point, I'm satisfied with the notion of setting up the trust, most definitely, because I think that's the first step. Whether you seed it with $1 or $35 million, that is a council policy decision that is entirely up to you. You know what our recommendation is.
Right. Okay.
But we can go forward in that direction, if that's the will of the council, yeah.
So
Then it won't come back next week? The staff
I would
report?
imagine it doesn't necessarily have to at that point. Does it?
It would have to, wouldn't it? I mean, if you're going to set it up, in order to set it up, you have to have council direction on that.
Okay.
Because remember, we have a report in February.
Yeah, but the actual, the construction of the vehicle itself, because that's going to take an amount of time regardless to set up the trust.
that's what I'm saying. We don't know.
So the appropriation, Mike, would it be, when would the appropriation have to come forward?
I don't know. I think it's a question for Bob.
I guess I would defer to Mitch on how long it takes to do the paperwork and set up the trust. I don't know that answer.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you for the opportunity. Mitch Barker, Executive Vice President with PARS. It's actually very uncommon for the same council session to both adopt the trust, appropriate the money, and choose the investment policy.
Thank you.
So the idea of adopting at a future meeting soon, it sounds like, and then choosing the appropriation amount soon thereafter, and choosing the investment policy either at the second meeting or the third meeting would be more common. Mm-hmm. The ability to do it all in one would have been monumental, and so I encourage you to adopt the trust. There is no charge to adopt, and there's no fees charged until you put assets in the trust. Okay. So if you adopt at the next council meeting and you don't appropriate for a year, that's okay. You made a positive step forward. Again, no fees are charged until assets are put in the trust.
Next meeting, I'm going to have you speak first. Because we have to go around the same circle. Thank you for
Let me
for
just
the
ask a
clarification.
question.
Yes, sir.
So assuming there's a funding principal of $25 million, and assuming your rate of return at 6%, what would the cost be to the city for delaying it by a quarter?
Well, we'd have to do a projection to be sure. I'm not that fast with the math. Jason's much better at that, or Bob. But one key point I did want to mention, because there were some concerns about where the market will go. As we discussed yesterday, Highmark Capital, the investment manager, will average into the market, better known as dollar cost averaging. So if you put $10 million in, you put $20 million, you put all $35 million in, they're still going to do this over a 90 to 120 day period. So if, God forbid, you were to put in some amount, and then the market started moving down, the second, third, and fourth tranches into the market will get at the lower cost. So that's very much of a positive to look at it that way.
Okay. So the direction is to, we're going to set up the account, and when appropriate, they will bring it back to discuss the terms.
Yes, I mean, we would look at that being in the summer months, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because it has to be established on the quarter, right?
Okay.
Quarter's interest would be $375,000 at 6%.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, do you need a motion on that, or you just?
We have direction.
We have direction on it. Okay. What's next?
Easy. Did you take quarter of 6%?
Is there a motion to adjourn?
1.5%. So moved. 250. So 1.5 times 250.
Very adjourned.